a 1-minute reaction to the film.
So each one do that in turn?
Maybe, and then I think we'll have time for questions.
I guess I'll start. Susan saying. I'm Susan Wolf-Downs. I'm Holly Bismarck.
And Laurie Johnstone.
So I guess I'll start with my reaction once I saw the film, my first thoughts. I had no idea what the movie was about, so it was a nice surprise to sit down and have an opportunity to watch this. Like I hadn't seen it before. My initial reaction is, how cool is this? And what a great effort that was made on the part of these poets to create these signs in ASL, these poems in ASL. We've seen more and more that ASL is under attack, and as the generations pass, we worry about the loss of this language. And so it's great to see these young teenagers making certain that the language will continue to be alive. I'm still trying to process a little bit what I saw, Susan said.
Power! Jeff Power from the audience. Jeff Power, I guess that makes sense. I think it's just great that the Poetry Club dedicated one night to deaf poets and deaf people coming. All over the U.S. we see, you know, American Sign Language is out there, but do people really know about it? The same way that when you go to a doctor's appointment or a hospital, you see the different languages listed, and to inform people if they need an interpreter, they can get one, but you don't see ASL listed there.
Really, I'm thinking about this sort of thing myself. That there's so many opportunities for people to be exposed to the language of people who are deaf in so many places, and it should be out there and advertised more.
My first thought watching this movie is remembering myself in high school as a young deaf girl and being involved in drama, and it just really, really was touching to me. And I love to see how this has continued through the years. And I know, you know, I mean, the young girl, beautiful sign, kind of fast, and I'm trying to remember the name. I have a short-term memory. Peter Cook, who was the deaf man with the long hair and the beard. He's amazing. His ASL is just fabulous. And to see him kind of coaching this young girl, it was really, really wonderful to see that. But you can see the potential in this young girl.
The next Patrick Graybill.
And
Patrick Graybill's the famous poet.
Patrick Graybill could be among them. And Ben Bahan from Gallaudet University. Or the next Dr. Panera.
Who's now getting on in years, but really, you know, when I look at this, I see that there's a lot of inspiration to be had, and that, you know, finally things are getting better in some ways.
I'm trying to remember the girl's name.
Annetta.
Right, that's what it was. And I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with Peter Cook, but he is famous in the deaf community, and he is just an amazing actor, poet, storyteller. And so that young girl has a wonderful opportunity to be working with him to be able to get his, input and his encouragement to be able to improve. I'm jealous, that she has that opportunity.
It was really good to see her really put it out there in front of other people and be able to show her confidence and her attitude about life and her spirit. I thought that was really amazing.
She was just saying that the girl has the opportunity to really follow her dreams here. Great opportunity. And I think it's a great opportunity, too, that she has a relationship with a hearing person now, and that they can kind of join cultures and learn each other's cultures, and that this hearing person has this great opportunity to learn about deaf culture.
One thing I'd like to add to what people are saying is we have to remember, as long as there's deaf people on Earth, we'll always have this language. And it's something that's been carried across generation to generation to generation. So it's great to see that at a high school level and at a college level that people are having the opportunities to be taught how to use this language and what it means to be deaf. Because this is the language of deaf people, from deaf people. There are hard of hearing people who use this language as well. But this language is learned from each other as peers. If there are people who have deaf family members, that's how this language is passed on. And that's what perpetuates the use of this language generation to generation. So as long as there's deaf people, there will be this language. We don't know what the future brings in terms of the size of this community, but it will be there. No matter whatever means by which people are assisted in order to be able to hear to some degree or another, and all that may be wonderful. But we will always, always have people who are deaf, who are born deaf, and devices may support them, but at the end of the day, when they go to bed at night and they take off those devices and they pull the blanket up, they're deaf. They're people who use this language.
That's so true. Can't argue with that.
Do we want to take questions?
I don't understand ASL. I loved watching the poetry, and I could almost understand the poem about the mother, the sperm and the egg, and the baby with the kisses on the face. Was she signing words, or was she performing gestures that were miming an event? Is it both? Were there words that you saw?
I saw everything. That's my opinion. I saw all of it in there.
Really? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry, yeah, just that I saw everything. I wasn't able really to separate it. I didn't separate it in my mind when I watched it. It was a mix of everything. There were some signs, there were some gestures. There was. I don't think there's a way that you can kind of put that in a book. You can kind of show how it's done, but it's not something that can be written down. This step, that step, this step. I mean, I guess that would be more for English poetry or written language poetry, but in ASL poetry, it's just something that happens with all of that included.
You have to remember that in the end, this language is a visual language. And that's why deaf people come in and are the ones to teach this language and share this language with you. Because they know what it's like to be visual. And that comes as a result of hearing loss or deafness. So it's just inclination and being visual that informs it. And all of the emotion is there. All of the uses of the language are there, all put into the poem.
I'm just copying her comments for deaf people in the back.
My question is, what are those instructors teaching them the language that you found refreshing? It's hard to understand what you don't, why that you can still learn to sign better than you're already knowing how to sign.
I'm not certain I know what you're asking. Can you ask it again?
Do you understand my question?
I think I might have a kind of a clarification, or maybe when you see the hearing kids that are saying their poetry, if you've learned English, could you perform like that up on stage, and like the beat that they use and the words that they use and the way they rhyme? They've learned that kind of style, so the kids that know how to sign, they know that language, but how they perform it, how they put it together with the motions, and how they make it more visual, that type of technique. And that panel, I think that's where the question is, that those kids know how to sign already, but they don't know how to perform like that and create that type of performance. The same way that the hearing kids that can just maybe read a poem off a piece of paper, but that performance that they give with that impact and everything is a very different way to perform it.
Okay. So I understand about the performance part, but I thought I understood from the panel this excitement at seeing American Sign Language so vitally used. And I didn't know if that meant a performance aspect or just the way the signing was, just choice of gesture. I'm not sure how to... So this is just my lack of knowledge, so I apologize.
But that's why we have interpreters here, so we can work through this, right? But when we talk about spoken language, it has intonation. And intonation is used in a very special way for performance. That's true about the use of American Sign Language in this case, and what's so inspiring. So it has that same je ne sais quoi that intonation has. It's not anything you can write down in a book or capture in a book. And whichever way that people can express themselves in a poetic manner, it can be done in American Sign Languages as well, and it captivates you and inspires you. So, because this is a very unique language that uses all manner of linguistic aspects and features in order to create meaning, it's sometimes difficult to actually capture that in another language and translate that. And in order to become skillful as a poet in American Sign Language, it takes a great deal of practice. Some people work on this for years and years and years before they stand up before an audience. So, does that help you?
Yes, yeah, it does. Thank you.
I think, in reference to your question again, I think, the teacher who is teaching the kids and coaching the kids, I feel like you said, how they perform for a hearing audience or a deaf audience has to be taught and coached in order to get, into being better, but also for it to look like a universal ASL is a language for all people with your hands. It's not a foreign language. It's American Sign Language. So it applies to hearing people as well. And poetry can be linked. It can be connected between hearing and deaf people. Everyone has feeling. I mean, we're all, people. We're all humans. We all have feelings. So the way that they're able to show that, I feel like just that the teacher's able to kind of pull out of, the deaf kids in the movie that we saw, more of a kind of a way for them to learn how to express themselves. and how to show the message that they have to share in a more clear and visual way for all people to understand. I think that's what you're asking.
I have a question. What do you see something like this happening in New Hampshire, or how can you see this coming here?
Well, unfortunately, we have no school for the deaf such as the one that those students were at. It's very unfortunate. It's quite sad. We wish there were schools for the deaf in the area, more of them.
There's the Manchester program for the deaf and hard of hearing who there's an interpreter who lives in Concord. Her name is Karen Braz, and she is an amazing person in the theater. And the Manchester program tends to have a spring show because she directs plays. So she directs the deaf kids in the Manchester program, and I really think that you all might enjoy going. So I'm sure some of you in the audience already know that and already attend. I'm sure that there's other small classes where teachers are, encouraging, kids to learn in that way. But the language itself is just the key, so it's important to have that as a huge part of any performance in ASL.
I have a question. I don't know if any of you noticed the other person who is instructing the students, Manny. He is an amazing American Sign Language poet himself, quite skillful, and is now a professor at Gallaudet University. There are activities and programs, performances in many states, and it would be wonderful if we could get performers such as those who are performing in New York or California to come here and perform for us here in New Hampshire. That would be a great thing.
I feel like New Hampshire, it's a small state, but if you can imagine how small the hearing world is in New Hampshire, so sometimes it can feel like there's limits, and also, of course, financial limits. Who's going to sponsor a deaf poet club? The same way that you saw in the film, their poetry club got cut. So the economy hits everybody in that way, especially in these times.
Yeah, go ahead.
Related to that question about would you see it happening in New Hampshire, I think the thing that impacted me, that made me, brought out emotion to me, is to see the fact that, when the kids were all in the auditorium at Lexington and they were they were saying ASL, ASL, and that, that self-esteem and that identity and that sense of community, it's so lacking for the kids here in New Hampshire. And so many of the kids that are deaf here in the schools in New Hampshire are never going to experience that type of identity or sense of community until they go away to a school where they're going to be with another critical mass of kids like that. So that was something that made me, that really touched me from seeing that in the movie and comparing it to the experience of the kids here in New Hampshire.
Do you have a question? And then, go ahead.
Just a small piece. Before my daughter was old enough to speak, we signed little words with her. I learned them, she learned them, and I'd like to think there's part of her mind that will always be visual because we did that. She still does that. And I know it's tiny and I don't understand deaf culture, but it is a small bridge. Many parents do that. And it's beautiful. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, if I could, to your comment. It is nice to see more hearing parents teaching their kids signs before they can speak. And scientific research has actually shown that language is already there. Even before you can, you know, you can enunciate words, the language is there. And so to add, you know, visual and facial and spatial language to that, you know, it really kind of improves the kids' language and their brain power and everything. So, you know, and then typically people are going to choose to speak, and that's what's going to escalate.
I just add, it's true that babies long before they begin to talk are quite visual. And I remember when my daughter was 6 months old, I had already started signing to her, and she was using first words, things like milk, mama, things like that, at 6 months. And from there, she went on to develop actually very good sign language skills, and she's a fluent signer, as fluent as us now. But it really started at 6 months of age.
You know, the only place I've seen 100 or 200 deaf kids gather together and get excited like what we saw on the screen has been in Massachusetts. It would be nice if we could somehow coordinate some events where we could get together with a larger number of kids so that the deaf kids in New Hampshire could benefit from that. Because it's powerful.
There's also a large number of deaf people and gatherings in Vermont. It's a small community, but they do get together.
But we're here in New Hampshire. And it's true that many times, you know, deaf children are being educated in isolation. That's the philosophy of the land. And the only way that things can happen will be to have programs where those isolated deaf kids who are out there have an opportunity to come together. And maybe parents then might see the results of that sort of interaction when deaf kids meet other deaf kids and have that identification that there's somebody else who's out there who's like them. I grew up in a school for the deaf, a specialized school for the deaf, and I saw my friends, peers, all of whom used sign language, who were deaf, just like I was. That was a very normal experience for me. I didn't feel like other or different or anything like that. You know, of course they wanted us to practice using speech, but really amongst ourselves as deaf people, whether I visited them in their homes or in school, I had this experience of being normal because there were other people like me around me using the same language as me. So it would be nice for some of these kids who are out there on their own, if they could come together, maybe, you know, see a play or do that sort of things. And understand that there might be another kid from the next town over or from another part of the state who's just like them. Because I feel so often these kids are the sole deaf kid in a huge school and they have no sense of who they are. And if by the time they get to 4th or 5th grade, sometimes because they can't communicate with their peers or their teachers or anyone else, they feel so isolated that they begin to develop these sort of maladaptive behaviors. And they really need a lot of support. This issue is not anything that can be solved easily. It's very complicated. But that's one of the problems that we have here in New Hampshire. I don't know. There may be, maybe 10 or so different schools that have groups of deaf children who come together in Massachusetts. As well as schools that are even larger than that, have dormitories where kids stay and spend time with each other on a regular basis. That doesn't happen here in New Hampshire.
Another question. The use of the different writing styles and the words that were almost like cartoons moving around, I liked that. I'd like to know what the people who are deaf thought about that production technique.
I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was cool too. It was like you could visualize things more, and it was, you know, it it kind of blended in with the poetry itself. It was very cool.
Says Holly, I have no, I'm not that sort of creative personality myself. I would not be the right person for poetry, but I just thought it was so cool to see the use of that technology in the film. And you could then begin to see what it is that people are using, bringing together in order to create the poems. When I read poetry in English, there may be things that I understand or don't understand, things I like or I don't like. And that might be true for some deaf people watching some types of poets as well. There may be things they like and understand and things they don't like or understand. But having the pictures on the screen in that way to outline some of what that creative process was, I thought was interesting.
Believe it or not, I did Shakespeare my last year of high school. I had to read that. I didn't understand. But I remember, the teacher was signing and had to kind of explain every single line and do a lot of work that way for us to get it.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. Some people get it, some people don't. In Massachusetts, they have a program. Oh, I'm sorry. In Massachusetts, we have a program, Teen Fest, where teens from various high schools come to one location and spend a week or two practicing and rehearsing, performing, whether they be plays or poems. On the last Friday, they have other attendees from outside come and see their performances. Oftentimes it's the case that they had no idea that deaf kids could do this sort of thing, but they have a program like that. And there's a woman who owns a theater school in New York who comes to teach these teens and how they can perform, and that's often held at Newton North High School.
Your comment about what deaf people can do made me think of just the last part of the poem where it said, I wish that we didn't say deaf people can't hear. I wish that we did say deaf people don't hear, and that there is a choice. And I don't want to hear. I enjoy being deaf. So, I could get a cochlear if I wanted to. I could wear a hearing aid. I don't hear. I don't want to hear. So deaf people have a choice, and I like it. I love that part of the movie, that it's a preference. Deaf people don't hear.
Any other questions or comments or reactions?
Sorry, Mr. Wilson.
Well, if no more,
Everybody's falling asleep?
No.
Oh, they're just tired. Yeah, it's Tuesday.
I would say go tell all your friends to watch this movie next month. Did Montana, a month from now. And I will make this offer that if the deaf and hard of hearing community want to have a poetry slam or an event here at the theater,
Bring it on.
bring it on. We have a larger hall, or we have this room, intimate or large.
I have a question for you. I'm wondering, in this series, are you having these films, are you showing them with captions so that deaf people could come and see other movies in the series?
That is a question for PBS.
Where's the PBS guy?
I think he left, yeah.
Oh, he's gone.
The reason why I say that
Because you can't see it without the camera.
is really any movie
Yeah.
that's shown in the public means that it should be accessible, if it's shown to the public. Just in the same way that you would have a ramp coming into the theater. You would have showings that were captioned to make your programming accessible to the community. So in the future, it might be something you want to consider when you're looking at your budget and things that you might want to include in your budget so as to be more accessible for deaf people.
And can I make when we move to more digital formats, we can have more closed captions. Right now, the film industry sends everything on film, and if captioning isn't on it, we can't put it on. So we don't have a choice, even if we ask for the captions. But in 2 years, that should change significantly.
Yeah, it's all about the mighty dollar.
Yeah.
Everything costs money. For someone to sit down, listen to the script, and then type it all out, they have to pay that person, they have to pay for the technology. But, technology is just in leaps and bounds changing the world, so it should be something that we should be able to do very simply. There's nanotechnology, there's everything. To caption a movie, is it really that complicated? There's so many different technologies out there, and computers and things that we can do in this world, and to forget just to put the words at the bottom of the screen for us to be able to access that amazing stuff is just... So, here in New Hampshire, there's one movie theater that's captioned, and it's not close to where I live. It's in Newington, and one movie a weekend you can pick, from one movie, and that's the movie you have to watch if you're deaf. And if you're not interested in seeing that movie, you're going to drive an hour? No. So, I haven't seen a movie that's been captioned for years, because to me, I haven't found one that's worth driving an hour. Waiting for Harry Potter to come out on DVD.
I come here from time to time because at this theater, there are subtitled foreign films, and so I do like to come here. And I want to compliment you on that, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity to see foreign films.
The Red River.
I agree. The almighty dollar.
I think it's important for parents to see this film as well, because parents, who have a deaf baby have choices to make, and they have to be the ones to decide if they're going to, implant their child with a cochlear, or if they're going to get them hearing aids, if they're going to let them learn sign language or send them to an oral school. And this is a great movie for parents to see this perspective, instead of just hearing the perspective of what the doctors tell them and things like that. So I think this is really important for deaf children out there.
Yeah, and I think that in the end, when we talk about children's experience, we want to make certain that children have a full and fruitful life, that they're happy, that they're not frustrated in their experiences of dealing with the world.
I think there was, sorry.
Question in the back?
Looks like there's still 2 more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the next generation that makes the changes. It's always the next generation that makes the changes. It would be nice if we could get this film into the schools, because that's our generation that's going to make the changes. If the hearing kids out there could see it, they're open maybe to a little bit more change, especially they're so digital oriented, they're so communication oriented. They can't go anywhere without their music, and they've got things in both hands now. It would be nice if we get this particular film out to the schools in our state.
And deaf kids too. Deaf kids have all the latest technology as well. It may be that they're wearing much larger headphones and boosting that sound much louder than the kids who aren't deaf, but they're all using pages, all on Facebook, all that sort of thing. So.
Good. Well, thank you very much to our panelists.
And to our interpreters.
Yes.